join us, and met their people last week to go through that. So their agency, they're very busy. I'm just sending a note to them saying, yes, so that's really exciting. So if you're, and if you've got a flavoured gin, here we go. Now, here we go. So let's say hi to Plymouth, shall we? Hello. Here we go. Monsieur Sean.
Hello, good morning, good evening.
And to you, happy World Gin Day.
Thank you very much.
Probably, is it tomorrow for you, or is it today?
It's Saturday morning, so it's 9:30 Saturday morning.
Too early to speak about gin, I don't think.
Yeah, so well, my day's just beginning to think about gin. So yes, long lazy lunch is the plan for the rest of the day.
Is that a fact? Oh, I'm jealous. I'm jealous. Look, seriously, thank you so much for making the time to speak with me today, this morning. I was saying before you jumped on, you may have heard it or not, people do ask me a lot what my favourite gin is, and clearly I'm spoiled for choice, like many person. And I just keep coming back to your spirit, and I'm not just saying it because I'm speaking to it. I think, and we want to unpack this a bit in the time we've got together. It's one of the most venerable brands around the world. I was saying at the very beginning of the conversation, what we're looking at maybe 7,000 brands around the world, or one form or another of gin, maybe 5,500 to 7,000. Yours is one of the oldest around the world, truly. In many ways, depending who you talk to, it's almost its own category of gin in terms of almost got its own heritage appellation. In some levels.
It used to. Basically, it's something that we gave up a few years ago. So yeah, it's quite scary really, because when I started in '94, there was 12 gin distilleries making 20 gins. So then when you talk about 7,000 different brands and everything else, that's a really good journey in like 30 years. And it's the flavour profiles and everything else that have gone through have been massive. But it is one of the sort of nice things in it is to look after a really old brand like Plymouth Gin, because that's it. I'm the custodian of the recipe. And when I decide I've had enough and I retire, the next person will come along, and that's the way the world is. So to keep the brand the same effectively for 200 years is quite an achievement for all of us that have gone before me.
Absolutely, and I know we've got some things we want to talk about, but can I just go back to that just a little bit, please, Sean? Because you'll go to bars like at the famous bar in Atlas in Singapore, for example, and their big collection of the place. It's extraordinary fun. And they've got, old bottles of this and old, I think Gordon's was the one, and other labels and stuff, like this museum they have. In your opinion, has there been much change? Like you talk about Plymouth brand, for example. The recipe is what it is for your standard gin. How do you has it evolved in any shape or form? Or
it absolutely does. And it's one of the beauties about making gin is because we use natural ingredients and they grow every year. Every single year they're slightly different. Right. The French have a great word for it, which is terroir, and that talks about the soil, the sun, the rain, the hillside, how the climate is for that particular growing season, and everything else. Because what we're doing with the botanicals, we're generally extracting essential oils out of plants, and how the plant grows depicts how it's going to make those essential oils for the year. And they will always be slightly different, and they will always have slightly different percentages in the plant depending on the growing year. So that's the fun bit, if you like, is to make sure that you, the consumer, don't notice that Mother Nature can sometimes be awkward. So we spend an awful lot of time selecting them to keep the flavour profiles the same. But I can guarantee if you go and get a bottle of Plymouth Gin from 10 years ago, it will be subtly different just because we use natural ingredients. And, even on every single still run, they are slightly different. So we have a large, what we call a blending vat, where we can put lots of different distillations into to make sure that you don't notice a difference between individual distillations. So that's the fun side about making gin.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you have a master distiller? What's the question about notice, shall we say? What's the relationship with your suppliers? Because then the people who bring your botanicals to you, I mean, what's that relationship like? Must be very important.
Oh gosh, it's an integral part of what we do. So we work with about sort of 6 different suppliers in the UK and into Europe, because that's where most of our botanicals is European. And know, it's like this week, I've spoken to two of our suppliers. So, because we're about to go into the coriander season, and then straight after the coriander season, we're about to disappear into the juniper season. So it's just getting a feel for how the year's going, you know, whether the crop's looking good, whether they're not looking good, whether it's been a dry year, a wet year, and all the other things that you generally talk about when you're using commodities such as anything that grows.
Fascinating. Let's wind back then, because you've been in that role almost, what, 20 years now, thereabouts? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And your
started as
background's Royal Navy, if I've read that correctly too, yes, sir?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a strange route to get to where I've got to be perfectly honest. So my last job in the Royal Navy was in Plymouth, because Plymouth is one of the major Royal Navy ports. Mm-hmm. And in my last 9 months, I met Rachel, who foolishly agreed to marry me, and we moved in together. And then this is obviously the days before the internet. So every Thursday, the local paper would come out with all the jobs in it, and the assistant manager's job was advertising at Plymouth Gin. So I just sent in my CV on the first post on Friday morning, not really knowing what was going to happen. Yep. And here we are, all those years later. And I consider my timing to be absolutely brilliant because of what I said earlier. When I started, very few gins. Now we've got thousands. There's a lot more interest. People are more picky about drinking gin, which is always good. And it's just been a ride, and it's been brilliant.
That's interesting to see, because I was one of my early observations on today's chat was how you think of the evolution of that industry. As you say, there's a handful of traditional brands, if you like, and then I guess this new world brands start to emerge. And I also, shout out to Hendrix, for example, who kind of broke the mold in some ways from a commercial sense, right? And people could see what you could do, right? And then people my end, and New Zealand and Canada and America and stuff. And then it kind of went back to UK, where you had these traditional brands sort of responding to this innovation and creativity. And it's not necessarily a binary choice. It's like there's room for everybody.
Yeah, it's been an interesting, because if you go back to the sort of early mid-90s, the cocktail bar scene was just beginning to refresh itself. Mm-hmm. The only place really we can get cocktails, really high-end cocktail, was in hotels. So like the Savoy or the Dorchester or somewhere like that. And then a couple of bars opened in London because they found some old cocktail books talking about making fresh drinks, with fresh juices and everything else. But the one thing that linked them all together is the fact that gin is the heart of all cocktails, pretty much. If you pick up an old cocktail book, they are going to be 80% gin cocktails and 20% the rest. It's what gin is all about, is making cocktails, using flavors, using to build around, to create great drinks, which is why you get things like the martini or the gimlet or something like an original pink gin. I have to say original pink gin nowadays, because people don't know what a pink gin actually is. It's just one of the bizarre things that's changed in the last 10 years.
I know, so. I prefer the old one. Yeah. I prefer the original version myself too.
Yeah, so do I, particularly the first drink of the day. It's really great. But it has been a journey. So, and actually, as all the sort of traditional gin brands started in the early 2000s, it started to sort of, if you're making your own gin, what do you do that's different to what somebody else has done? What's your USP? Yes. And that's when you start to explore different botanicals. And that's when you go, so if you look at the gins from about 2005 to about 2015, you're talking about using some non-traditional gin botanicals you'll find locally. And you talked about the ones just then about places in Australia and New Zealand and things like that. And then we move on to flavors. So the adding of like strawberry flavors or berry flavors, or doing something like that, copying a little bit about like the vodka guys were doing. So yeah, it's been a very interesting flavor journey. And that's the thing about it. It is the great thing about gin. It can fit so many different drinks, and it allows itself to go in so many different directions, because the only ingredient you need to put in, which I think you said earlier on this morning, is juniper. Yep. After that, you can do whatever you like, basically. It makes it a fascinating tool to play with.
Which brings us back to why I certainly appreciate Plymouth Gin, because whilst we've been talking about creativity and some innovation, especially new world sort of gins, and they're amazing for what they're coming up with, and it's great to have that palette of expression, which is almost infinite. Your gin is so versatile because it's not boxed into one particular dominant botanical, shall we say, put a flavor profile that way.
we've been really lucky because if you go back to 200 odd years when the recipe was originally put together, they generally didn't know what they were doing, and it is that journey. When you're putting a gin recipe together, it is very much hit and miss about what you do. And what's happened over the last couple of 100 years is we make G&A a lot better. So the invention of the coffee still in the late 1800s was a massive step forward when it comes to making clean, pure, if you like, G&A. And that then allowed the flavors to come through. We are now able to select them better because although the equipment we use is from the 1930s, we can still understand what's going on in the individual ingredients a lot better. So whilst the recipe is exactly the same, the actual technology behind the making process has got better. Although the still we use here at Plymouth is still from, well, I've got a photograph from 1906 and it's in it. So it's a little bit older than that, but we're not quite sure how old it is. So it's still a good 120 years old.
Oh,
So
brilliant.
actually the technology we use, you know, the science we're using and the technology we're using is hundreds and thousands of years old. But what it comes down to is it's the ratios between the ingredients and the ratios between the ingredients and the way that you get the interaction of the essential oils. And we don't have a dominant botanical. So yes, juniper is the largest ingredient that goes into Plymouth Gin, but not by a lot. And then all the other ones that follow it, because we've obviously only got the 7, we end up with quite a close ratio of flavors. And what that means is that it ends up being incredibly user-friendly because you can take it in different directions.
Exactly right.
So if you add vermouth, you can become, I would argue, literally with anybody, that Plymouth is actually the best martini gin on the planet. You know, it's you know, and you can make or break a Plymouth martini by the vermouth you choose. So we all have a personal choice of vermouth, and there's quite a few of those, which makes choosing martinis. And then it's whether you use olives or olive brine, or whether you have a twist, or whether you don't, or whether you make a Gibson. I had a really good friend who described a martini as like making a cup of tea. It's exactly the same ingredients, but you can take it in a million different directions. And that's exactly what you can do with a martini. 2 ingredients and a couple of garnishes.
Hence my quiet obsession, Sean. Yeah. And for me, with Plymouth, it's usually in my freezer, like I said, so viscosity is there. And I use Dollar Dry and a fresh lemon peel. We can't get Amalfi lemons here, unfortunately, you know, like you guys can get over there. But we make do, and that's me. That's like a 1-to-10 ratio, and that's my happy place. Yeah.
All I would do is take out the garnish. I don't do garnishes in my martini.
Well, it's funny you should say that because I'm not one for the big peel. Digressing a little bit, so I usually cut it quite fine and just do a little, and then out it goes, kind of thing. Because I don't want it taking over. Let's come back to you though. So let's talk about sustainability, because I know that's a very important part of the Plymouth story now, in terms of the way you operate the distillery and also, I guess, your commitment to environment in general.
Yeah, it's something we've been on a journey now, so probably about 15 years, and we have to take best use of the technologies that comes along. And one of the things for us that's recently changed a couple of years ago is we made the decision to go through an electric boiler, so that we could turn the distillery into being fossil fuel free. So for many years, the electricity to the distillery has been hydro. So we've been sort of making the energy as green as we can, but we've still been using natural gas to run the boiler. So we did a project, and about 12 months ago, we got rid of the gas boiler, and now we use an electric boiler. And because we're using hydroelectricity, so we're completely fossil fuel on the production of Plymouth Gin. And then all of the packaging is recycled. Glass, we've lightened the bottle as much as we can, and we've got a high content of recycled glass in it.
Great.
So we are actively trying to take every single step. But technology sometimes is not your friend. So even in a glass bottle, there's lots of energy needed to be used to make glass. So we're trying to find suppliers that are looking to change the way they make their glass. So it's a definite journey, but it's a great thing that actually more and more people are doing it. And the other thing we've started doing over the last few years is we support the local, what they call Ocean Trust. They are based in Plymouth, about 200 or so meters away from the distillery. And they are working on seagrass in Plymouth Sound. Plymouth Sound is a large harbour in front of the town. And we're supporting them doing their seagrass project.
Oh,
so yeah, it's sort of something that we're quite passionate about, is trying to because we're fortunate that we're in a position where we can do a bit of leading on it. So, which is always great to do.
Absolutely, truly, truly. Let's jump back to your gins then. So people will know, also the classic. I'd love to talk about the Navy Strength. That has come up a lot today for some
Yeah.
reason. And your famous slow gin. I was just talking about slow gin just before. We've got some nice
Yeah,
local
yeah.
varieties, but that's been around forever.
Well, yeah. So the Navy Strength is an interesting one to start with because it's old 100 proof. And if you guys are you familiar with the story of where you get to with gunpowder and 100 proof?
I've heard various stories, but I'd like to hear it from you. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So, in the days before you could ABV alcohol, or you could, or they worked out that water and alcohol were different weights, which is how you can work out ABV. The only way to tell whether your product had alcohol in it was to mix it with gunpowder, and then set fire to the gunpowder. And if the gunpowder ignited, then it was above what they deemed to be 100 proof. And we're not talking about confining the gunpowder so it goes bang. You're talking about it fizzing and hissing on the top of on a thing. So you either had it in, or there was alcohol in your product, or there wasn't. And then they fine-tuned it. So technically, 100 proof in English, because it's different in American, is 57.14%. So and then what a Scottish customs officer worked out, a guy called Sykes, is how to start doing specific gravity, so recognizing the difference between alcohol and water and doing it that way. But 100 proof is where it used to be. So that's effectively the early origins of Plymouth Gin in 1793 would have been, give or take, around about 100 proof. And it fell out of favour because it was quite a bold strength at 57%. And then what we did for our 200th anniversary in 1993 is we bottled a batch of Plymouth Gin at 100 proof, which by the mid-90s was becoming terminology that people didn't really understand because we all went ABV in Europe in the early 80s. And then in 96, when Plymouth Gin was bought by effectively a management buyout, we wanted to keep 100 proof going, but we needed another name for it. And that's where Navy Strength came in, because we had a gap on our label, and one of our owners was a gentleman by the name of John Murphy, who'd started a band called Interbrand, which is still around. Yes. And John came up with the term Navy Strength. So that's where it all started.
That's fascinating. And I showed you this before in our earlier meeting, and I've got one of the earlier bottles back to me. But I do remember seeing the Navy with a red label.
Yes, silver label and a red label for the slow gin. Yes, yeah. And we've kept it going because actually, if you're making, the one thing about Plymouth is because the flavors are quite subtle, sometimes they can be overpowered by stronger other cocktail ingredients like sweet vermouth. So because it's the alcohol that holds the flavors, the more alcohol you have in a bottle, the more flavor. So therefore, the more ballsy it can be when it's fighting against things like sweet vermouth. So we always recommend the Navy Strength in things like Negronis.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because that will just help punch it through. Whereas I would never use Navy Strength for a martini. I'd always start at 41.2, because the thing about a martini is a dilution concept. Is that the gin, as you're stirring, this is why you should stir a martini, not shake it. As you're stirring it down, there comes a point where the alcohol flavors just tweak off and you allow the aromas of the gin to come through.
Absolutely.
And that's the perfect point. And that's generally speaking high 20s. So you can't control that if you're shaking it. So that's why we start with. And if you're using 57%, it takes you longer to stir it down. So it's better to use 41.2.
That's fascinating.
They're exactly the same thing. Yeah. And then slow gin is something very peculiarly English. It goes back. We think, and this is the other thing, is the history of it has been properly lost. So this is trying to put together the odds and sods of what makes it work. So there was an act of parliament in the 1700s called the Enclosure Act, when they got rid of common land and they started making lots of fields, and they used the blackthorn tree stroke bush, if you like, to act as the hedgerows. And that's where the fruit is. So the slow berry is effectively a very, very awful plum. And then somebody discovered that if you soak it in gin and add a bucket load of sugar, you get a really beautiful little drink that's called slow gin. And again, we've been making it here now since about 25 years. there used to be a distillery. Used to be Hawker's Slow Gin used to be made in Plymouth. So we used to supply the gin for Hawker's Slow Gin, and that goes back. That predates about 1800, something like that. Goes back into that sort of period of time. But it's also the heart of a few really great cocktails, like a Slow Gin Fizz. Is a really great summer drink, and actually it drinks really well neat. It's only 26%.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like putting it in your hip flask and going hunting, shooting, fishing, basically type of thing. So its uses are great, and it's actually also a really good port substitute. Just as an after dinner drink with cheese.
Yeah, I'm a fan, absolutely. And just as an aside, one of the makers down here in Tasmania, they make a very fine one, and they use the leftover berries to make like a quince paste.
Yes,
like berry paste for cheese board, and it's divine.
Yeah.
Quick question, back to Navy's drink. Well, back to storage, because I was talking earlier about barrel-aged gins, for example, and how that must have been one of the earliest forms of expression. You were saying before about the ABV level, so to speak. That's how they measured it. So gin would have been higher ABV.
Yeah.
No stainless steel back in the day. So am I right in thinking that most gin was also kept in barrels and would have get tainted at some point? Or?
Yeah. And actually the alcohol used at the time, because if you think about how you make alcohol, traditionally pot stills existed. You can only get up to about 85% when you're pot stilling alcohol to an ABV point of view. And that 15% makes a lot of difference. It's really interesting if you compare new make spirit, which becomes whiskey, at 95.8 to GNA at 96.1. That little 1.5% removes so many impurities and cleans the alcohol up so much that the stuff they were actually making it with a couple of hundred years ago would have changed the gin. It would have just been and that's what I was saying earlier. The recipe's the same, but the making methodology really got refined in the last century. So they're now consistent.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. Because so I guess that's what keeps you coming full circle in our conversation about each day for you. It must be a different adventure, so to speak. The variable you've got this lineage or this heritage you're custodian of, as you rightly said, an old team there, and yet you're managing those variables on a day-to-day basis, and yet you still want to keep the gin relevant and contemporary to the market as well. So there's interesting balance.
Yeah, I think that side of it is you can only do what you can do, and we have a recipe, and we're very fortunate that it's well loved around the world, and it has a very long history, and particularly in cocktail making and everything else like that. So but we also recognize that people have different flavor profiles, and people come to gin at different times of life, and that moment when you walk into a bar and you're about to have a convivial moment, that really dictates what you're about to drink and who your friends are with and what mood you're in and everything else. And I would argue that a lot of people don't know what drink they're going to have when they first walk into a bar. So actually that sort of early interaction with the bartender is really important to drift you in the direction you think you want to drink. But again, going full circle, it is the beauty of Plymouth. It does so many cocktails really, really well. So that moment when you're deciding to have a drink, and then Plymouth is a good go-to gin.
I think that's the perfect note to finish our conversation on for now. I think I shall let you get back to on with your day or World Gin Day. So again, thank you, Sean, everyone at Plymouth for making our chat conversation possible.
Thank you very much for your time. Good to talk.
Have a great day. Thanks again, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll let you jump out. Little cross button down there somewhere. They'll find it. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Head Master Distiller, Sean Harrison, Plymouth Gin, and all the team there behind the scenes making that conversation possible. Thank you very much. Amazing. 1793. So this is the old bottle. Oh, you can't get it. 1793. Can you imagine? So if you don't know it, please. It's hard to get around in this program. In a minute, we'll be talking to Eureka Distilling as we go around the world, and then we end back in New Zealand, and we're going to talk to the lovely people at Chemistry Gin as well. So Philip Crossley, we're going to have a chat just with Philip. I'll be right with you in just a minute. Thank you. I'm getting hungry and thirsty about you. What I'm trying to do, if Instagram allows me to do this, I'll just try and save this on my phone and upload it. I may even dive, if I can, up to my YouTube channel. So it's there for posterity, our various conversations with the makers. and upload this as a post if I can. I've never done anything for 3 hours long before, so we'll see how we go. So just doing a bit of a tour of gins around the world. I think we've covered most of them. I wanted to show you this one for my collection. You can't buy this, but again, this is a really lovely story, and it ties in with Plymouth Gin in many ways too, now I think of it. So it's called the Retiring Gin, Bert Shrug, a lovely gentleman, quite elderly now, and would make this basically very, very, very small batch operation, and these are all handmade labels, literally, and he was a pharmacist by profession over his career, and when he was caught, he told me the story, when he was courting his wife back in the day, he was trying to impress the father, I think it was, and they drink Plymouth Gin tonics, and that's how they bonded, and so he got blessings to, marry his then to-be wife. And there's an early review on my website again of him, Bert Shrug, craft distiller. So he doesn't make any more, and so this is his retirement project, basically. So we talk every so often, and every time he'd make a special batch just for me, inspired by Plymouth Gin. So I'm really touched. So I hang on to this little bottle, and it just goes another story, because I don't know many stories of how the spirit brings people together, like we are virtually today. So I'm going to introduce, let's get the website up for Eureka. So we're going to Sydney, about 300 k's that way from my place about now. So we're in Canberra recently, and we met Philip, who's the founder of Eureka. So Philip, I'm going to